appointed to South Africa in 1987 as Margaret Thatcher's envoy, Lord Robin Renwick became a personal friend of iconic leaders like Nelson Mandela, F.W. de Klerk and Mangosuthu Buthelezi, acting as a trusted intermediary between them during the period leading up to the release of Mandela in 1990. Now, in Mission to South Africa, this wonderful read, it's a diary of a revolution. Lord Renwick has penned down his experiences during those important years, and today the former British ambassador to South Africa joins us for our weekly book slot. A very good morning to you, Lord Renwick. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. I'm sure that is a way that you can reflect on what it was at that time. How do you look back at that time?
Well, that's exactly right. It was the worst of times. When I arrived, we had P.W. Botha, Magnus Malan, the police and the military running the country, complete with death squads, Civil Cooperation Bureau, thousands of people in detention without trial, the ANC leaders in jail or in exile, and the complete deadlock. So this was a very, very difficult period indeed. What I describe in the book are a lot of meetings I had at that time with P.W. Botha, difficult and stormy, including about saving the Sharpeville 6 and stopping bombing neighboring capitals and so on. We did manage to make progress towards a Namibia agreement, but there was no progress whatsoever with internal change. So what saved the situation were, in terms of the best of times, some truly remarkable people in South Africa, in all communities, and a lot of them, many, many people, but led on the one side by F.W. de Klerk, who changed the direction of the country with his speech 25 years ago, and of course Nelson Mandela. And there are many records of many meetings in there with Mandela.
I want to talk to you about it because we've had a furore on the one side here in South Africa about naming of streets after F.W. de Klerk, and also I want to talk to you a little bit about Nelson Mandela. Let's start with Nelson Mandela, who he has the aura of this very warm, kind-hearted man, but he was also a very tough politician in your estimation, I would think.
Absolutely. I mean, he's always viewed as a kind of saintly icon, and in fact he had some very saintly characteristics, above all magnanimity, forgiveness. But he was the wiliest, craftiest, cunningest political operator I ever met. And his whole technique was co-option. Instead of fighting with his opponents, he believed in trying to disarm them by other means. So first of all, his warder ended up as his chef. The justice minister kept asking me to help him get Mandela out of jail. Then Mandela started saying to me, you're my advisor, you may be Thatcher's envoy, but you're really working for me. And how do I win over Thatcher too? Which he did, by the way, completely.
The Ronald Reagan school of getting him into your tent, as it were. What about this scenario around the F.W. de Klerk street name changes? There's a big uproar in Cape Town around it. Do you have a view on this and your view on F.W. de Klerk and that change in course of our history?
Well, let me tell you Mandela's view on F.W. de Klerk, because Mandela, believed Mandela was inclusive. He believed that every section of this community has to make its contribution to the country going forward and so on. That was his whole mantra. So one day he launched an attack on de Klerk, which was on behalf of the ANC, and I happened to be in Cape Town, and I went to see him. And it was this little office in the townhouse, and I said, I used to walk in here with P.W. Botha and have to argue for people's lives. And by the way, he was never going to let you out of jail. Please remember that but for de Klerk, you might still be in jail. Mandela, of course, burst out laughing. You could say anything to Mandela. He never got annoyed. He burst out laughing, but then he said to me, you're right, and he richly deserved his Nobel Peace Prize as well as me, because he made peace possible by changing the direction of Afrikanerdom and enabled a peace to come about.
Well, that settles that argument then. I wanted to take you to the book itself quickly. The start of the book, you start during a time as an advisor to Lord Carrington during the Lancaster House negotiations, let's call it that. Take us into Zimbabwe and tell us about the sort of anecdotes of that time and where you see the country now.
Well, I spent a lot of my time in an office at Lancaster House arguing with Robert Mugabe, who didn't want an agreement at all. Mugabe kept telling me, that power comes from the barrel of a gun. He also assured me that, he said, I have a PhD in terrorism. So we had to trap Mugabe into having a peaceful agreement, which in the end he did under pressure from President Machel in Mozambique.
Yeah.
And then we helped Mugabe establish a government, and for many years after that, there was a reasonably moderate, successful government in Zimbabwe until his hold on power was threatened.
Well, Lord Renwick, thank you very much for joining us. Of course, in our book slot this week, it's Mission to South Africa, Diary of a Revolution, a very, very interesting read of a very interesting time in Africa. Thank you once again for joining us.
Thank you very much.
And you can find it in all good bookstores, I would think.
I hope so, yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Lord Renwick. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Let's just have